The Appalachian Mountains are known for their beauty, rolling green hills, endless trails, and a silence untouched by time. But in 2012, that same wilderness became the stage for a chilling mystery. Brianna, a devoted 46-year-old mother, and her 18-year-old son Dylan set out on what was meant to be a simple family trip. One morning, they were laughing and making plans to return home. By nightfall, they had vanished without a trace. For 3 years, their family searched, prayed, and feared the worst, until a shocking discovery exposed a horror sealed away in concrete. The Appalachian Mountains in the summer of 2012 stretched endlessly in rolling green waves, their quiet trails and whispering forests masking the secrets they had kept for generations. For Brianna, a 46-year-old single mother, the trip was meant to be an escape, a chance to rest her mind and reconnect with her only son, Dylan, who had just turned 18. Life had been difficult in recent years. Her divorce from a respected but cold-hearted lawyer had drained her spirit, and Dylan's impending move toward adulthood left her clinging to these final shared moments. Together with her sister, her brother-in-law, and their 2 children, they rented a rustic cabin near one of the smaller, less-traveled valleys of Appalachia. The first 2 days were filled with laughter, campfire stories, and hikes through the thick canopies where sunlight dappled the forest floor. But then, unexpectedly, Brianna's sister's family had to leave. An emergency back home cut the trip short, forcing them to pack quickly and rush off before the trip could feel complete. Brianna insisted she and Dylan would stay behind. "We'll make the most of it," she reassured her sister. 3 more days won't hurt. Dylan needs this." For mother and son, the extra days carried a rare closeness. They hiked long trails, cooked simple meals, and shared conversations about Dylan's uncertain future. On the final morning of their stay, the 5th day, the plan was simple. Check out by 4 in the afternoon, load the car, and drive back to the city. At 9 o'clock that morning, Brianna tried to call her sister. The phone rang and rang, but there was no answer. She left it at that, not concerned. A few hours later, at noon, she sent a voice message through WhatsApp, her voice light and casual. "We'll be leaving around 4. Call me when you can." But it was unknowingly the last time her voice would ever reach her family. On the other side, her sister saw the missed calls and the voice note, but was distracted, tending to her children, and still rattled by the emergency that had pulled her home early. At first she thought nothing of it. Brianna and Dylan were probably out exploring the trails, enjoying the fresh mountain air before returning to the routine of life. Yet within 30 minutes, unease began to creep into her chest. Something about the silence felt unnatural. She dialed Brianna's number again. No answer. Again. Still nothing. With each call, the anxiety sharpened. She called for nearly an hour straight, pacing the living room, her mind cycling through possibilities. Maybe they'd lost signal, maybe the battery had died, maybe they were driving somewhere. But then the line went dead entirely. The phone powered off. By 4 o'clock, the time Brianna had promised to leave, her sister was nearly frantic. She waited, hoping her phone would light up with a call, a text, anything to reassure her. The hours dragged, heavy and tense, but no call came. At dawn the next morning, unable to stand the silence, she drove back to the cabin. What she found made her blood run cold. Some of Brianna and Dylan's luggage was still there, untouched, as though they had never prepared to leave. A few bags sat slumped in a corner, but the phones were gone. Their car was missing. The beds had been hastily slept in, the blankets rumpled, but nothing explained their absence. Panic rising, she called the local police, insisting something was wrong. She begged them to trace the location of Brianna's phone. Within hours, technicians began searching the last known IP address, but the trail was strange and unhelpful. The signals bounced across remote valleys, pointing to isolated areas with no roads, no cabins, no activity. To the sister, it felt as if Brianna and Dylan had been swallowed whole by the mountains themselves. Fear quickly turned into suspicion. Her mind returned again and again to Brianna's ex-husband, a man she believed capable of cruelty, despite his polished reputation as a lawyer. She told investigators he hated her. He wanted to control her. You have to look at him. The police agreed to pursue the lead. They questioned him, examined his alibi, searched his home and office. Yet nothing tied him to the disappearance. The case began to lose traction, the possibilities thinning out like the mountain fog that vanished with the morning sun. When Brianna and Dylan did not return home, the days that followed blurred into a haze of panic and disbelief. For Brianna's sister, the silence was unbearable. She called hospitals, police stations, and friends of Dylan, but no one had seen or heard from them. The first missing persons report was filed, and within hours, search teams were combing the Appalachian area near the cabin. Officers walked the trails with flashlights, dogs sniffed the underbrush, and helicopters scanned from above, their blades chopping through the still mountain air. Yet there were no signs, no footprints leading into the woods, no abandoned vehicle by the road, no dropped belongings along the trails. It was as though mother and son had been plucked off the face of the earth. Investigators began with the most logical step: phone records. The WhatsApp voice message Brianna had sent her sister at noon was the last verifiable sign of life. After that, the calls went unanswered and the devices went dark. When police attempted to trace the phones, the results were baffling. The last known pings bounced through rural cell towers, leading to scattered and unhelpful coordinates deep in the mountain valleys. The data suggested movement, yet no one could confirm how or why. The areas were remote, with no nearby cabins or campsites. Searchers drove to those coordinates anyway, hiking through brush and swamps, but they found nothing but trees and silence. It was an invisible trail, tauntingly out of reach. With no evidence from the terrain, suspicion turned quickly toward Brianna's personal life. Investigators spoke with her sister, who immediately pointed the finger at one man, Brianna's ex-husband. He was a prominent lawyer, wealthy and respected, but their marriage had ended bitterly. He had fought her fiercely in court, belittled her in front of friends, and resented her custody of Dylan. To her sister, it seemed obvious. He hated her. He wanted control. Who else could have done this? Her voice cracked under the weight of grief and certainty. Police brought the ex-husband in for questioning. He was calm, almost too calm, and his alibi was airtight. He had been in court with multiple witnesses present the day Brianna and Dylan vanished. His tone was cold, even dismissive, as he told detectives, "I may have hated my ex-wife, but I'm not a murderer." Still, investigators searched his home, his car, and his office. They combed through his phone records, his financial transactions, his client meetings. Not a trace of connection appeared. Every theory the sister clung to unraveled under scrutiny. The investigators, reluctantly, began to clear him as a suspect. The family's frustration grew as weeks stretched into months. Without suspects, the case began to lose traction. Posters of Brianna and Dylan's faces appeared across Appalachian towns, two smiling portraits above the word "missing." Candlelight vigils were held. Volunteers combed through valleys with sticks and flashlights. News crews reported on the disappearance, dubbing it the Appalachian Mystery. But as seasons changed and no new evidence surfaced, media attention shifted elsewhere, leaving the family behind with their unanswered questions. The sister refused to let it go. She pressed the police to pursue other leads, demanding updates, pestering detectives with theories. Each time she mentioned the phone traces, she was met with the same refrain. The data was inconclusive. It led nowhere. Yet deep down, she felt there was something there, something overlooked. The phones had to mean something. Meanwhile, whispers spread in the small communities near the mountains. Some locals speculated that Brianna and Dylan had run away intentionally, fleeing debts or secrets. Others claimed the woods were cursed, swallowing hikers who strayed too far. A few believed wild animals could have attacked them, though the lack of remains or signs made that theory improbable. None of it gave the family peace. Detectives briefly chased other angles. A drifter spotted near the cabin, a report of suspicious men in a pickup truck, a rumor of someone pawning jewelry in a nearby county. Each thread unraveled into nothing, a mistaken identity, an unverified claim, or a dead end. The investigation was a patchwork of false starts, wasted man-hours, and gnawing frustration. By the one-year mark, the search had slowed to a trickle. Officially, Brianna and Dylan were listed as missing persons, but without evidence of foul play, the case began to gather dust. For the family, this silence was worse than bad news. It was an endless purgatory. Brianna's sister described it as living with a wound that never heals, because no one can tell you what cut you. But beneath the quiet despair, shadows of unease remained. Investigators couldn't explain why no personal belongings, no wallet, no watch, no spare clothing ever surfaced. They couldn't explain why both phones had gone dead at nearly the same time. And they couldn't ignore the fact that other disappearances had occurred in the region, though none were tied directly to Brianna and Dylan. It was this mixture of silence and suspicion that defined the second act of the case. The world moved on, the vigils grew smaller, but the mystery deepened. Somewhere out there, Brianna and Dylan were gone, and whether they had been swallowed by the wilderness or by human hands, no one knew. The sister's gut told her the truth was darker than anyone dared to admit. She only prayed that someday, somehow, the mountains would give up their secret.
3 years had passed since Brianna and Dylan disappeared into the mountains, and for their family, time had not dulled the wound, it had only deepened it. Hope had become a cruel cycle. Every time the phone rang, every time the news reported on a body found in the region, her sister's heart leapt and then crashed again. The faces of Brianna and Dylan still hung on faded posters along the roadsides, though most passers-by no longer noticed. The case was cold. Life seemed to have forgotten them. But in the summer of 2015, a call changed everything. Workers at a construction site on the edge of a remote Appalachian town had been tasked with clearing an old, sealed septic chamber buried beneath cracked concrete. It was supposed to be routine maintenance, a simple job to prepare the land for a new project. But when the chamber was broken open, the stench that poured out was overwhelming, a foul air of decay trapped for years. Inside, to their horror, the workers found 2 human bodies, tangled and decomposed, wrapped in the remnants of clothing and surrounded by decayed personal belongings. Panic rippled through the site, and within an hour the police had cordoned off the area, their expressions grave. At first, investigators believed the remains might belong to a missing couple who had vanished months earlier. The size and positioning seemed to fit. A man and a woman, possibly victims of some local predator or criminal. Calls were made to the couple's relatives, and for a brief, painful moment, another family thought their nightmare might finally have an ending. But when forensic teams began their work, the truth began to emerge. DNA tests, cross-checked against national missing persons databases, revealed what the sister had both dreaded and expected for years. The bodies were Brianna and Dylan. The news shattered her world. When the police called her to deliver the confirmation, her knees buckled and the phone slipped from her hand. She had braced herself for this moment countless times, imagining it in sleepless nights, but hearing the words out loud was like being cut open anew. "It's them. We found them. there was no more for Hope. The two people she loved most had not walked away, had not vanished into mystery. They had been taken, hidden, discarded. The discovery reignited the case, and with it came a swarm of media attention. Reporters returned to the mountains, filming the site where the septic chamber had been unearthed, speculating about what horrors had taken place. The local community was stunned. Neighbors who had once believed Brianna and Dylan had simply wandered too far into the wilderness now realized something darker had happened. The discovery of the chamber, sealed tight and deliberately concealed, was proof. This was no accident, no simple disappearance. Someone had put them there. Someone had wanted them to remain hidden forever. For investigators, the case was no longer a mystery of if, but of who. How did Brianna and Dylan end up in that chamber? Who had sealed them inside and why? Evidence collected from the scene hinted at robbery. Bags lay with them, but valuables and phones were missing. It was a chilling glimpse into their final hours, but no answers yet. For Brianna's sister, grief mixed with fury. She stood at the edge of the excavation site, staring at the earth that had concealed her sister and nephew for 3 long years. The mountains had finally given up their secret, but it was not mercy. It was a wound reopened. She promised herself she would not stop until she knew the truth. Someone had stolen them, someone had silenced them, and now, at last, there was a chance to find out who.
The discovery of Brianna and Dylan's bodies reignited a fire beneath the cold case, and detectives who had once filed the mystery away now worked around the clock. For 3 years, theories had swirled like fog, but the sealed septic chamber was undeniable proof. This was deliberate, calculated, and cruel. Their deaths had not been an accident of nature, but a crime committed by human hands. Still, the question remained, whose? The investigation turned back to the smallest pieces of evidence, re-examining every overlooked clue. Brianna's sister, still haunted by guilt and suspicion, pushed police relentlessly. Her voice cracked with frustration during meetings, but her insistence became the thread that finally unraveled the case. "Check the phones again," she begged. "Someone had them. Someone used them. Don't tell me they just disappeared into the mountains. Trace them." At first, the police dismissed her. They had combed through cell tower data years earlier and found nothing solid. But with the chamber discovery proving foul play, they agreed to try again. This time, advances in digital forensics and new data-sharing agreements gave investigators tools they hadn't had in 2012. Digging through old logs and reinterpreting pings, analysts noticed irregularities. After the phones had gone dark near the cabin, there was evidence, brief, fleeting, of one device reconnecting days later in a different county, far from the original search area. The signal led them toward a rural valley, dotted with decrepit farmhouses and half-abandoned properties that rarely drew attention. Detectives followed the lead, staking out one crumbling property in particular, a sagging farmhouse with rusted machinery scattered across its yard. It seemed unremarkable at first, but the longer they watched, the stranger it became. Men came and went at odd hours, always cautious, always watchful. Vehicles with out-of-state plates appeared and disappeared. Neighbors whispered about rough types staying there, but no one dared speak too loudly. With a warrant secured, the police moved in. What they uncovered was darker than they had imagined. Inside, they found weapons, stolen property, and evidence of organized crime. But the most shocking discovery was not material, it was human. Locked in a back room, malnourished and terrified, was a couple who had been reported missing months earlier. They were alive, trembling and weak, their ordeal a nightmare of captivity. The couple's rescue transformed the case from a mystery into a sprawling criminal conspiracy. Under interrogation,
fragments of the truth began to surface. The property was linked to a gang calling themselves the Colo Kings, a small but vicious crew of 4 men, 2 from Mexico, 1 from Venezuela, and 1 a local American drifter. Their crimes spanned robbery, extortion, and abductions, but they had managed to remain under the radar by keeping their victims silent, either through fear or through disappearance. Brianna and Dylan, investigators pieced together, had been one of their earliest Appalachian victims. The rescued couple described overhearing chilling conversations among the gang. They spoke of the mother and the boy who had fought back, who had refused to surrender valuables, phones, jewelry, a locket worth thousands. In the struggle, the pair had been struck down, their deaths accidental but brutal. Fearful of police attention, the gang had sealed their bodies in the septic chamber, believing no one would ever find them. For Brianna's sister, the revelations were both devastating and vindicating. She had been right to demand more, right to believe the phones mattered. Now, at last, there were names, faces, and a tangible enemy. But the knowledge that her sister and nephew had died over jewelry and electronics, murdered for resisting theft, was unbearable. The police launched a multi-state operation to capture the Colo Kings. Over the following weeks, raids swept across hidden properties and safe houses. One by one, the men were cornered. Some tried to flee, others fought, but the weight of law enforcement bore down. In the end, all 4 were captured, shackled, and dragged into custody. The case that had once seemed hopeless was finally breaking wide open. What began as a disappearance in the mountains had unfolded into a story of crime, cruelty, and survival. But for the family, the relief of answers was inseparable from the agony of knowing the truth. The Colo Kings were responsible, and justice was within reach, but justice could never bring Brianna and Dylan back.
The arrests of the Colo Kings sent shockwaves through the Appalachian communities. For years, whispers of disappearances and strange crimes had floated through the valleys, dismissed as rumor or paranoia. But now, with the gang exposed, the truth could no longer be ignored. The capture of the 4 men was splashed across local and national news. "Gang behind Appalachian disappearances arrested," read one headline. For the first time since 2012, Brianna and Dylan's names returned to the front pages, not as missing persons, but as victims whose case had finally been solved. For Brianna's sister, the news brought mixed emotions. Relief that their killers were caught, mingled with a bitterness of knowing that the discovery came too late to save her loved ones. In the quiet of her home, she sat with old photos spread across the table. Brianna smiling at a family barbecue, Dylan holding his diploma, their faces frozen in moments of joy. She whispered to them as if they could hear her, "They can't hurt you anymore. I promise I'll see this through. I'll be your voice now." The legal proceedings began swiftly. Prosecutors charged the 4 men with multiple counts: murder, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, robbery, and concealment of human remains. Each man was held without bail, their faces grim as they were paraded into courtrooms filled with reporters, victims' families, and locals who had once doubted that such evil could exist in their quiet mountains. The trial stretched for months, every detail of Brianna and Dylan's final hours dissected before a jury. Forensic evidence painted a chilling picture: the bloodstains that matched, the broken jewelry chain found in the gang's possession, the phone records that placed the devices in the farmhouse. Witness testimony from the rescued couple delivered the final blow, their voices trembling as they recounted overhearing the killers argue about the mother and the boy who wouldn't give up the locket. Each day in court was agony for Brianna's sister. She sat in the gallery, listening as lawyers described the brutal reality, how Brianna had been struck, how Dylan had fought back, and how both had fallen against rocks and bled to death within minutes. It was not a swift disappearance, not a merciful vanishing. It was a fight for survival that ended in violence and fear. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks as she listened, clutching a tissue in one hand and a rosary in the other. But she refused to look away. She wanted the men to see her face, to know she carried the weight of Brianna and Dylan's memory into that courtroom. The defense tried to spin the story as a robbery gone wrong, an accident, a case of poor judgment rather than intentional murder. But the jury saw through it. The sealing of the septic chamber, the hiding of the bodies, the possession of stolen items, all pointed to cold deliberation. After weeks of testimony, the verdict came back guilty on all counts. The Colo Kings were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When the judge delivered the sentence, Brianna's sister closed her eyes and whispered, "For you, Brianna, for you, Dylan." It was not triumph. There was no joy in the room. Justice in this case was a cold substitute for the lives that had been lost. But it was something. A promise fulfilled, a truth finally uncovered. In the months that followed, the community rallied around Brianna's memory. A memorial was erected at the trailhead near the cabin where she and Dylan had last been seen. Locals left flowers and candles, hikers stopped to read the plaque that bore their names, and her sister visited often, standing in the quiet woods where laughter had once echoed. She would trace the carved words with her fingers and imagine her sister walking beside her, Dylan laughing ahead on the trail. Yet despite the closure, the grief lingered. Nights were still restless. Sometimes her sister replayed Brianna's last WhatsApp voice message, the one sent at noon on that final day. "We'll be leaving around 4. Call me when you can." She would play it over and over, her tears falling as she realized how ordinary the words were, how unaware Brianna and her son were hours away from tragedy. That single message had become a haunting relic, a reminder of everything lost in the blink of an eye. The case also sparked broader changes. Law enforcement across the region increased coordination for missing persons, investing in better digital tracking and cross-agency databases. For many, Brianna and Dylan's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers that can hide even in familiar places. But for her sister, the lessons meant little compared to the hole left behind. They were more than victims, she told a reporter once. They were people who loved, who laughed, who lived. I want them remembered as more than just a headline. On the 3rd anniversary of the discovery, Brianna's sister stood at the memorial once again. The sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in soft orange hues. She placed fresh flowers beneath the plaque and whispered, "You're not lost anymore. You're home now." For the first time in years, she allowed herself a small smile through the tears. The fight was over. The truth had been found, and though the ache would never fully fade, she knew that Brianna and Dylan's story would never be forgotten.